I never imagined that my 5th wedding anniversary would end with laughter, coming from the very man I once loved. Beneath the sparkling lights of the Orchid restaurant in Chicago, where Henry, my husband, had reserved a private dining room decorated with white lilies, crystal glasses, and silk tablecloths, he raised a glass of champagne, his eyes sweeping smugly over the nearly 50 guests, mostly business associates and a few members of my family. "Let's raise a toast to 5 years," he laughed loudly, 5 wasted years with a dreamy, naive high school teacher who knows nothing about the real world beyond a few novels. Laughter erupted from several men at his table. Someone patted his back, as if he'd just delivered a killer punchline. I kept smiling. My eyes didn't blink, my hands didn't tremble, because I had been waiting for this exact moment for the past 3 years. I gently set my glass down and leaned forward to pull a cream-colored folder from the drawer beside my chair. The one I had prepared long ago. "Funny you mentioned the word wasted," I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "because that fake prenuptial agreement you secretly altered behind my back is officially void." Henry stared at me, the smile fading from his lips. A wave of murmurs swept across the room. I pushed the folder toward him, letting it glide across the snow-white tablecloth until it stopped right in front of him. "And to make the evening even more memorable," I said, pulling my phone from my purse and letting my fingers glide over the screen, "I think everyone here deserves to know a little secret you've been keeping." A chorus of message alerts pinged like a chaotic symphony. Henry turned his head, his face going pale. "What is this?" he whispered. I didn't need to answer. On everyone's phone screen appeared screenshots, messages between Henry and Zoe, my younger sister's best friend, bold flirting, unmistakable photos. She doesn't understand anything," Henry stammered, his eyes avoiding everyone. "It's just a misunderstanding." "Is that so?" I smiled, rising from my seat, letting my gaze meet each stunned face around the room. "Text messages with timestamps, locations, photos, all misunderstandings, including that night you said you'd meet Zoe while I was visiting my mother in Denver?" The table sank into suffocating silence. Some people quickly looked away. His mother stared into her wine glass, as if wishing she'd never come tonight. I looked back at Henry, the man once so confident he thought I'd never dare to fight back. "I used to stay quiet, used to be accommodating, used to let you treat me like some decorative prop in your life." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for those nearby to hear each word. "You picked the wrong woman to underestimate." The banquet room doors opened, and right then, 3 people entered, 2 dressed in professional business attire and 1 familiar woman carrying a black leather case. "Olivia, my attorney." "Apologies for the interruption," Olivia said as she approached the table. "We're here with the divorce papers and a few documents that federal agencies might be interested in." Henry stood up, stepping back, his face ghostly. "Grace, you can't do this." "You're wrong," I cut in, my voice calm and ice cold. "I've been preparing for this for a very long time. I used to believe that understanding a man only required love, trust, and patience. But what Henry gave me wasn't a marriage, it was a stage play, where I was cast as the sweet, smiling, agreeable wife, while he pulled strings behind the scenes. At first, the condescension came in small jokes. "Don't worry about that, Grace, I've already audited it." Or, "These numbers are too complicated, better if you just focus on your classroom and parent meetings." I would smile softly and step back. But every comment, every dismissive glance, every meeting I was excluded from became cracks in my foundation. At 38, Henry ran a well-known financial consulting firm in Boston where we lived. He was used to being the smartest man in the room, and my presence, a high school literature teacher, only fueled his misguided confidence. What he didn't know was that I had been paying attention all along. I learned to listen in silence, the way my best students did before crafting brilliant literary analyses. I remembered every detail, the late-night phone calls with his unusually low voice, the spreadsheets he hurriedly minimized when I entered the room, and the documents he left on the kitchen counter, thinking I could never understand those columns of codes. I created a separate email account not linked to any family device just to store snapshots of those documents. Notes I jotted after conversations Henry assumed I wasn't even following. When he mentioned an off-the-books fund transfer from Atlantic Consulting, I nodded like the obedient wife, still stirring his coffee. But that night, I replayed the audio from my phone and transcribed every word. Maybe the first real blow to my trust didn't come from the numbers, but from a familiar name. Emily Jenkins. She used to be my best friend in college, now working in client relations at Henry's firm. One night, while tidying up the study, I found a card that had slipped from his drawer. Handwritten in delicate script. "Last night was perfect. I can still smell your cologne in my hair." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, my fist clenched white. And I knew it was time to stop being the compliant wife. I reached out to Veronica Blake, an old law school acquaintance, now a financial and divorce attorney in New York. We'd never been close, but I remembered her as sharp, brilliant, and discreet. We met at a little cafe in Brooklyn, where I pretended I was writing a novel and needed legal advice for a character betrayed by her husband hiding assets. Veronica studied me for a long moment, then nodded. If it's fiction, I'd tell her to record everything, especially financial conversations, and double-check the prenup. Some husbands get surprisingly creative. I laughed like it was a joke, but beneath that laugh a plan had already begun to form. After that I bought a voice recorder no bigger than a fingertip and hid it inside a dried flower vase on the dining table, where Henry often worked in the evenings. I set a password on my personal laptop and started teaching myself how to research companies, compare invoices, and most importantly, analyze the prenup I once believed was harmless. One night I opened the safe to review our home's deed and stumbled upon 2 copies of the prenup, nearly identical, but something felt off. The phrase "all assets to be shared equally" had disappeared in the second version, replaced by oddly one-sided clauses. I printed both and sent them to Veronica. Less than 24 hours later she called back, "Grace, your agreement's been tampered with, and this could be proof of fraud." I thanked her, then quietly stepped into the bedroom, watching Henry sleep like the world was in his hands. I told myself, "You've been directing this play too long, Henry, now it's my turn." It took me nearly a year to prepare for that night. Every step, every detail timed to the minute. It all began the moment I realized I wasn't naive. Henry was just too arrogant to notice the change in me. He thought I was still the gentle lit teacher who loved old novels and weekend baking. But I hadn't been that woman for a long time. Henry came up with the idea for the 5-year anniversary party, and that was my greatest advantage. He booked it at Le Rocholat, high-end restaurant in Beacon Hill, where he often entertained big clients. He wanted a night of class, status, and the illusion of a perfect marriage. I nodded, as usual. I let him make all the decisions, even though deep down, I knew this would be the stage for a reveal he never saw coming. 3 weeks before the party, I met with Veronica at her office in New York. This time there were no vague conversations about writing a novel. I handed her everything. Recordings, messages, photos of the altered prenup, and a financial analysis I'd done with help from an anonymous expert on a legal forum. Veronica went through every page, her face growing more serious. "Grace, with this amount of evidence, we're not just talking about an amicable divorce anymore. This could be a federal investigation. Are you ready?" I nodded. I'd been waiting for that night far too long. We broke everything down into 3 stages: public exposure, legal action, and contact with the tax investigation agency. I prepared a USB drive with all the evidence, encrypted and backed up in 3 different locations. Veronica would show up at the party with 2 associates from the law firm. The messages exposing the affair, screenshots from Henry's phone, were scheduled to be sent to the guest list using a timed messaging app. The night of the party went exactly as Henry had hoped. Glamorous, upscale, with nearly 60 guests. All the people he wanted to impress: partners, shareholders, a few high-profile friends, and only a handful of my family members for appearances. I chose a deep plum-red dress, simple but elegant, not to stand out, but to keep him complacent. Henry loved extravagance, and he believed a woman who chose simplicity couldn't possibly create anything significant. He entered the banquet room at 7:45 p.m., accompanied by Daniel, the company's VP, and 2 close associates. They laughed loudly, unaware that I had been watching their every move from across the room. Henry walked up to me and kissed my cheek as if everything were perfect. "You look beautiful tonight," he whispered. I smiled and softly replied, "Thank you. Tonight will be unforgettable." Dinner began, courses were served one after the other, and the murmur of conversation filled the room like background music to a play no one knew was about to reach its climax. When dessert arrived, chocolate mousse, Henry's favorite, Daniel raised his glass to begin the toast. "Let's raise a glass to Henry and Grace, an incredible couple, 5 years strong, 5 years of success." Applause filled the room as Henry stood up. He held his champagne glass and turned toward the crowd. "I know some of you thought I was being reckless when I married a literature teacher," he began with a smug smile. "Someone who isn't exactly passionate about finance, or, to be more accurate, doesn't understand a thing I do." A few quiet chuckles rose from the right side of the room. Henry continued, "But sometimes what seems like a safe choice ends up becoming a burden." He looked at me challengingly. "In the past 5 years I've learned that some things just can't be changed. Like how someone who lives in Jane Austen's world could never grasp an 8-figure merger contract." I stood up, my wineglass untouched in my hand. "You're right," I said, calm but clear. "Some things can't be changed. But some things can be uncovered." I placed a USB drive on the table next to his wineglass. "You know what this is, Henry?" He frowned. "More of your baseless suspicions?" I didn't answer. I simply pulled out my phone and pressed send. In less than 3 seconds, the room filled with notification chimes. Faces shifted, curiosity turning into shock, then into stunned silence. "That's what you sent to Emily Jenkins," I said. "Texts, photos, even a video of your hotel meetup at the Sherborne April 12th. Henry stepped back half a step. You were following me?" "No need," I replied. "You've left everything I needed right in front of me for the past 3 years." The back doors of the banquet room opened. Veronica entered, flanked by 2 associates, a folder in her hands. "Grace," she smiled, "time to sign the papers." Henry stood frozen in the middle of the room, his eyes darting across dozens of faces, shocked, then shifting to something between disappointment and disgust. Soft murmurs rippled like waves through the room, gathering around the space where he stood, completely alone. Daniel, the man Henry once called his right hand, pulled out his phone, got up and quietly left the table. As he passed me, he glanced at the USB still lying on the white tablecloth, then turned away without a word. "Grace," Henry growled, his panic barely hidden, "you're destroying everything we've built." I stood tall, eyes locked on his. "Not we, Henry, you built it on lies. I'm just pulling back the curtain." My mother-in-law sat at the far end, her face pale. She whispered something to her husband, then picked up her phone and left the table. Maybe she realized that the pearl necklace Henry gave her last Christmas, the one she proudly showed off, was likely purchased with funds from one of the bogus strategic consulting expenses on his financial reports. The sound of a door opening echoed sharply through the silence. 2 men in dark blue suits wearing IRS badges entered with a plainclothes investigator. Everyone turned. A calm, gray-haired man spoke in a deep voice. "Henry Gallagher?" Henry took a step back, his usual confidence completely gone. I'm the one you're asking for." The agent held up a set of papers. "We have a warrant for your arrest, on charges related to tax evasion, financial fraud over digital networks, and falsifying documents in federal records." A jolt of shock rippled through the room like electricity. A few guests quietly began gathering their coats and bags, eyes avoiding mine. Henry looked at me as if he still couldn't believe it. "Grace? You called them here?" I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I simply spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I submitted the files to the IRS 3 months ago. I've recorded, archived, and verified everything over the past 3 years. You said I wasn't smart enough to understand. I used that to make sure you'd never see it coming." Henry's lawyer, Mitchell Crane, burst into the room, his suit jacket still unbuttoned, panting. "Nobody says a word to investigators without legal counsel present," he shouted. The agent didn't flinch. "We have a warrant and all necessary evidence. Any concerns can be addressed in court." Mitchell turned to me, about to speak, but I looked him dead in the eye. "Don't waste your breath, Mitchell. I read the one-party consent laws in this state. I reviewed the federal fraud reporting statutes. Everything was legal. One guest, a longtime business partner of Henry's, stood up, shook his head, then turned to his assistant. Cancel all meetings with Gallagher through the end of the month. And contact independent auditors. Henry struggled, but when the cuffs were placed on his wrists, his look toward me wasn't anger, it was defeat. You won't get anything from this, he hissed through clenched teeth. I leaned down, gently picking up the USB from the table. I don't want anything from you, Henry. I want myself back. As they escorted him out of the room, the remaining guests stepped aside like an invisible corridor had opened. The chandelier lights above cast his faltering shadow across the polished stone floor. A few people I used to call friends rushed over with awkward words of comfort. I smiled politely but distantly. I was no longer the woman they once thought was soft and naive. Veronica placed a hand on my shoulder, her gaze steady and kind. You okay? I took a deep breath. Absolutely, I don't have to pretend anymore. The room slowly emptied, but I stayed where I was. At the spot where Henry had just been taken away, bearing witness to the collapse of a facade built on arrogance and deceit. No one dared look at me like a meek wife ever again, and that was my first real victory. For me. After that night, it felt like a heavy shell that had encased me for 5 years finally broke away. The house in Brookline, once a symbol of the successful marriage Henry loved to flaunt, now became a place of genuine peace. I had quietly transferred the title into my name 6 months earlier, during a moment when Henry hastily signed a stack of joint investment paperwork without reading the fine print. Back then I wasn't even sure I'd need it, but something in my gut told me that one day I would need that control to hold on to the one thing that wasn't manipulated, my home. Sitting in the oak-paneled study that had once been Henry's domain, I sorted through every drawer, every shelf, old contracts, dense documents. I packed them neatly into a box labeled The Past. Next to it I placed a fresh notebook, light brown leather cover with just one line written on the first page. Day 1 of the rest of my life. I returned to what I always loved, literature, but this time I wasn't just a reader, I was a storyteller. I accepted a teaching position at a small community college in Cambridge where students included older adults, single mothers, and those returning to school to change their futures. They listened to me talk about The Great Gatsby, but their eyes lit up when I spoke about recognizing manipulation in relationships, the language of control, and the power of knowledge, even in finance. One student named Melissa, a former supermarket cashier, asked me after class, "Do you think someone like me can ever understand finance? I just learned how to use a credit card." I smiled and handed her the first printout of the series I'd been writing, Hidden in Plain Sight, a financial self-defense guide for women. The idea started as scattered notes and slowly became the blueprint for a book. I didn't write it as a financial expert, but as a woman who had to learn how to survive in the shadows of condescension. I told real stories, used examples straight from the things Henry once did, and how I reversed them. The book isn't a memoir, it's a roadmap. I don't want women to just sympathize with me, I want them to act. I also founded a group called the Lantern Circle, a circle of light, where women from all walks of life come together to learn about personal finance, from how to read bank statements to how to detect signs of fraud in family-run businesses. It started with just 6 members, then 12, then 20. We met every Wednesday evening at the city library. I always began with a literary quote, "Knowledge is light," and then shared the power of understanding and taking control of personal finances. One evening, while organizing materials for a session, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Rachel, ex-wife of one of Henry's friends. I just saw your talk at the seminar. Could I join the Lantern Circle?" I read the message several times, then replied simply, "All women are welcome, as long as they're ready to learn and share." I no longer avoided the past. I used it as a foundation. Henry would go to trial this coming fall. I had been called as the key witness in his case, but this time I didn't tremble in the face of justice. One afternoon, after class ended, I stood watching students gather their notes, golden light from the setting sun casting a soft glow across the desks. A young woman turned back and asked me, "Ms. Grace, if you could go back to the first day of your marriage, what would you do differently?" I looked at her for a moment, then answered, slowly but firmly, "I would still love, but I wouldn't leave myself behind just to keep the peace." That was the freedom I had found. Not revenge, but the return of a woman who knew her worth, and would never again let anyone redefine it. That afternoon, Boston was quieter than usual. I was sorting through a stack of materials for the Lantern Circle meeting when the library's doorbell rang. Someone had arrived early. I looked up from the long mahogany table and turned toward the glass entrance. And there she was. Emily Jenkins. The woman who had once been my close friend. The one who used to walk into my home with a familiar smile, and who had also appeared beside Henry in photos I never wished to see. She stood outside the door holding a flyer for the Lantern Circle that I knew I had posted at a grocery store near South End. I didn't feel startled or angry. Those emotions had left me long ago, perhaps at the very moment I hit send to expose everything at the anniversary party. I walked out and opened the door. Emily pressed her lips together, her eyes wavering between apology and hesitation. "Grace," she spoke first, her voice as soft as a passing breeze. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I read what you wrote, and I think I need to start over." I stayed quiet for a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be certain that when I spoke, my heart was at peace. "Come in," I said, gently pushing the door open. "We start at 7. Emily stepped into the cozy space of the community room, where women from all backgrounds came together to share experiences, to learn, and most importantly, to help each other rise. That night, I didn't introduce Emily as someone from the past or the one who betrayed me. I simply said her name, just like I would for any new member. "Emily will be joining us starting this week," I told the group, my eyes not looking back but forward. "And, as you all know, the Lantern Circle welcomes anyone who wants to learn how to take control of their finances and their life, no matter where they're starting from." The group nodded. No one asked further questions. No justifications were needed. In that space, we didn't live by labels, we lived by growth. After the session, Emily approached me. She held in her hand a printed draft of the first chapter from Hidden in Plain Sight, the book I'd been sharing with the group. "Have you really forgiven me?" she asked, her eyes still holding a trace of doubt. I looked straight at her. "For the first time since everything fell apart, I haven't forgiven what you did to me," I said honestly, "but I'm also not letting it imprison me for another minute." Emily said nothing, but her shoulders sank in that familiar way I had seen in many women when they begin to confront themselves. It's not easy to turn back. It's even harder to knock on a door you once helped break. But she came, and that, I believe, was the first step. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone and finished the final lines of my book draft on my laptop. I didn't write about Henry. I wrote about Grace, a woman who once gave up space for others her entire life, only to realize no one can stand tall if they keep shrinking in someone else's shadow. I wrote that financial independence isn't just about money, it's about how we define our worth, through actions, through choices, and sometimes, through silence that chooses not to respond. The draft was complete at 11:47 p.m. I saved it under a simple title, Grace, the version I always wanted to be known as. The next morning I received an email from a small publishing house in Vermont. The editor's name was Claudia. She had attended one of my virtual financial workshops. "I read what you wrote, and it doesn't feel like a textbook, it feels like a mirror, where women can look in and see themselves. If you're open to it, we'd love to discuss publishing." I smiled, brewed myself a cup of cinnamon tea, and looked out the window, where the morning sun in Boston lit up each pane of glass, as if to remind me that every day is a chance to rewrite a piece of your life. No, I no longer live for revenge. I live to rewrite what I deserve, and this time, no one, not even the past, can hold me back. I once lived under the mask of the perfect wife, trying to hold together a marriage built on illusion. But the way others underestimated me taught me how to listen, observe, and rise. Now, I don't need anyone to define my worth. I choose to live with awareness, with knowledge, and with self-respect. And if my story can awaken even one woman who feels lost, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. What do you think about Grace's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories about relationships and personal transformation.